It's 9:30 p.m. Central African Time. You're watching the Globe on SABC News. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Simpiwe Ngwane. Good evening.
A very good evening to you and thank you for joining us. I'm Lulu Gabu. On to our top story. Algerian students determined to pursue Algeria's biggest anti-government protest in years boycotted classes on Monday to denounce an offer by President Abdelaziz Bouteflika not to serve a full term if re-elected.
Hundreds of protesters took part in small demonstrations across the North African country, continuing almost 2 weeks of marches and rallies against the 82-year-old leader's plan to seek a fifth term. Footage published on social media shows large crowds walking through the streets, chanting and raising their arms in the air.
Mass protests in Algeria over President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's intention to seek a fifth term in office. The 82-year-old has been in power for more than 20 years and is currently in ill health. He's now offered to speed up the election and to step down after a year if re-elected. That's likely to be viewed as an attempt to appease the protesters. They've been taking to the streets for 10 days now across the North African nation. They're the most significant demonstrations in Algeria since the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings that unseated rulers in neighbouring countries. Bouteflika has been criticised for sending his campaign manager to submit his election papers on Sunday. The president, who suffered a stroke 6 years ago, is said to be in hospital in Geneva. The Election Commission has now said all candidates must submit their candidacy papers in person. Bouteflika's opponents say he's no longer fit to lead, citing his health and what they call chronic corruption and a lack of economic reforms to tackle high unemployment. The government has played on fears among many Algerians of a return to bloodshed seen in the 1990s, when an estimated 200,000 people were killed after Islamists took up arms when the military cancelled elections they were poised to win. But this new series of protests has been generally peaceful, apart from scuffles on Friday, which left more than 180 people injured.
For more on this story, we are now joined on the line by Ebrahim Deen, a researcher at the Afro-Middle East Centre, a research institute based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Good evening, Ebrahim, and thank you so much for joining us on the Globe.
Thanks for having me.
Now, why should anyone in the region really care about what's happening in a very unstable Algeria?
I think the big thing about Algeria is it has been very stable over the past couple of years, the past decade. But what's happening now is we're seeing these protests in Algeria, these protests in Sudan, and I think it's very key and very important because it's mainly young people doing this. And, the regime in both countries, especially Algeria, is not being able to to actually cope with the protests, and are acting in very similar ways.
Now, when you say we see that it is young people driving the protests, staying away from class, which is definitely going to affect them going forward, where are the elderly people, where are the older people, the older generation, what are they saying about President Bouteflika standing for another term in office?
I think there's two things. One is the old people, many still remember the black decade between the 90s, after the violently cracked down on the Islamic Salvation Fund, the first after, was going to win elections in 92. Many are very fearful of that and are looking at stability. These young people don't remember that. They were too small to remember, these instances. And two is, I think, Bouteflika is 82 years old. He was alive when when the generals basically defeated the FLN, defeated the French. Many of these youngsters don't remember that at all. And also, aside of the fact that Algerian politics has become very obscure, and the fact that lower oil prices means that there's less money being spent on social services.
Ebrahim, why is President Bouteflika standing for another term, especially when you look at his health and the concerns that have been running for a number of years since he had the stroke? Why insisting on another term in office, even if it's not his full term?
I think one is the not his full term is just, to placate protesters and may not actually, be realized the result. But why is he saying? I think he's the only candidate able to navigate Algeria's, very obscure politics, which is, Algeria, they say, is ruled by la pouvoir, a coalition or a cabal of elite intelligence officials in the military. Bouteflika is able to navigate this. Many other candidates aren't able to do this. The DRS or the intelligence service will still play a big role. The military plays a big role. And there's no other candidate, I think, that can unite the different factions within the ruling elite like Bouteflika can. And I think that's the main reason. I mean, there's no other reason. And he's very sickly. He's not been seen for years. And so, that I think the only way is his ability to navigate the complex world of Algerian politics.
Now, do you think that history will be a better determinant with regards to going forward, especially looking at the protest? The youth are the ones driving this protest, and seeing an old man in his early 80s sitting in a wheelchair, looking very sickly, do you think this will be the deciding factor, and in terms of his party, in nominating him to stand again for another term in office, what do you think is the driving force in terms of holding on to power for the leadership of the party?
I think in terms of the party, that's the one point is the fact that, the FLN is still in the background, there is still intelligence services and military that control different politics. But in Algerian politics. But two, I think the party, and in many of these countries where, the officials have been involved for such a long time, the party is unable to grasp the reality that, he is old and that, people want to see some sort of change. And the party, I think, is unable to grasp it and feels that if, this decision is made, then they're going to be asked for more decisions to be made. So, they are afraid of also things spiraling out of control and demand becoming progressively more.
So far, the protests have seemingly been very peaceful and well managed. Any response or reaction from the international community with regards to what's taking place in Algeria?
Aside from France, which has its own ulterior motives in Algeria, most of the other countries seem very supportive of President Bouteflika. They're keenly aware and keenly would want to secure, Algerian stability, because in this region, especially there's an over-exaggerated perception of Islamist militancy. And so many see, they just want stability, similar to what's happening in Sudan. And, at the moment, the protests have not reached a tipping point, which, fully threatens the regime. Yes, they're widespread. Yes, there's lots of numbers, but there's not enough defections from within the ruling elite to actually show or actually point to a regime overthrow. And so international countries are heading there.
Do you think President Bouteflika would eventually stand down if the protests continue and enough pressure is exerted? I would think that the party would be astute enough to actually, they've already tried to step down a bit by saying he's going to stay in for, another year. But the problem is, the longer they take to replace him as a candidate, the greater the demands are going to come, similar to all other countries. And so it may start off as wanting reform, but if this reform is delayed, they may call for a regime overthrow. That would, definitely put more pressure and, may result in violence. Ibrahim, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure chatting to you. That's Ebrahim Deen, a researcher at the Afro-Middle East Centre, a research institute based in Johannesburg, South Africa, joining us on the line. Time now for a quick break. More news when we return on The Globe.